Clara McAllister stood at the edge of her family's sprawling ranch, the sun dipping low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields. The wind tugged at the hem of her dress, carrying with it the dusty scent of the prairie. She should have felt comforted by the familiar land. The acres her father had built with sweat and grit, yet today it felt like a cage. Her father's words echoed in her mind, stern and unyielding. Your promise to James Hawthorne. The union will secure our families. You must obey. Clara had never set eyes on James more than a handful of times, and even then there had been no spark, no shared laughter, no understanding. The thought of spending her life in the shadow of a man chosen by her father's ambition filled her with a restless ache. She had dreams, wild and untamed, of riding beyond the fences, of discovering the world beyond the familiar fields and the predictable routines. Yet here she was, expected to bow to a future she did not choose. Her mother appeared behind her, the sharp lines of her face softened only slightly by the waning sunlight. Clara, she said, her voice trembling with what she believed was compassion. Your father has arranged everything for your own good. James is a fine young man. You will respect the promise you made. Clara turned, meeting her mother's anxious gaze. Respect it? She whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. How can I respect something I did not choose? How can I marry a man I do not love just because it suits the family? Her mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears. It's not about love. It's about security, and you will learn to accept that. The words felt like chains wrapping around Clara's heart. She wanted to argue, to defy, but the weight of duty pressed down too heavily. Her father had built his life on careful plans, alliances, and promises, and she had always been taught that family loyalty came before personal desire. And yet a spark of rebellion ignited within her, a whisper that perhaps her heart could not be so easily tamed. She mounted her horse that evening, the leather saddle creaking under her weight. She needed space to think, to breathe, to find herself before the life she had been promised swallowed her entirely. The horse carried her beyond the fields, past the wooden fences into the wild expanse where the horizon met the sky in endless shades of gold and crimson. Here there were no expectations, no whispered judgments, no plans drawn by someone else's hand. Clara's thoughts wandered to the rumors she had heard of the lands beyond her family's property, vast stretches of desert and canyon, home to the Apache, who were said to be fierce and untouchable. She had always been fascinated by the tales, imagining the lives of those who lived free and unbound, following the sun and the seasons rather than the dictates of others. To her, they embodied a kind of freedom she had never known. The wind picked up, tossing her hair into her face, and she let out a long sigh. Perhaps this ride, this moment of solitude, could give her clarity. Perhaps the horizon held more than just the promise of another man's claim on her life. Clara did not yet know what lay ahead, but the thought that something, someone, might be waiting to change her fate stirred a quiet thrill in her chest. As the sun finally sank behind the distant hills, Clara turned her horse back toward the ranch. The golden light faded into twilight, and the first stars began to prick the darkening sky. She felt the weight of her father's promise settle back on her shoulders, heavy and oppressive, yet beneath it a small defiant flame flickered, the hope that her will might not be so easily contained. Tomorrow, she would face her family again, and the promise made would still hang over her like a shadow. But tonight, as the wind whispered through the prairie grass, Clara allowed herself one thought. Perhaps life had other plans for her, beyond duty, beyond expectation. Perhaps in the wild lands where the Apache roamed, there was a chance for freedom, and perhaps even love of her own choosing. The next morning, Clara rose before the sun, the horizon barely tinged with pale pink light. She felt restless, compelled to ride again though her body ached from yesterday's journey. She mounted her horse, hoping that the familiar rhythm of the ride might soothe her thoughts. But as she rode farther from the ranch, the land became wilder, less tamed. The paths narrow and rocky. She was so absorbed in the endless sweep of the prairie and her own tangled emotions that she failed to notice the shadows shifting between the cacti and scrub. Her horse, startled by a sudden rustle, bolted, sending Clara clinging desperately to the reins. The horse galloped wildly across the uneven ground, and soon Clara found herself disoriented, the familiar landmarks gone. Panic rose in her chest as the canyon walls loomed, steep and unyielding. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time felt distorted. The sun climbed higher, beating down relentlessly, and Clara's throat grew dry. The water flask at her side was empty. Her horse, exhausted and limping, finally stumbled, and Clara fell, scraping her knees and arms on the rough terrain. The heat was unbearable, and she felt the dizzying pull of fear and exhaustion. She knew she could not survive the day alone, not without shelter or water. It was then she heard the soft sound of movement, deliberate and cautious, coming from the rocks above her. She froze, her heart hammering in her chest. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a man tall and lean, with skin kissed by the sun and eyes that seemed to pierce straight through her. He moved with quiet assurance, every step deliberate, a warrior at ease in his own land. Clara's first instinct was fear. She had heard the stories of the Apache, fierce, unyielding, and unforgiving. But there was something in his eyes, something beyond hostility, that made her hesitate. He did not raise a weapon. Instead, he gestured for her to stay calm. "You are hurt," he said softly, his voice low and steady. Though she did not understand his language fully, the tone carried warmth and authority. He knelt beside her, examining her cuts and bruises. With careful hands, he cleaned her wounds with water he drew from a small gourd, then bound them with strips of cloth. Each movement was precise, almost reverent, and Clara found herself shivering, not from the cold, but from the intensity of being seen, truly seen, by someone outside the world she knew. He introduced himself with a name she would struggle to pronounce, Tall Bear. Though she could only understand fragments of his speech, his actions spoke louder than words. He helped her onto his horse, and they rode slowly, keeping to hidden trails that wound through the canyon. The wind in her hair carried the scent of sage and sun-baked earth. For the first time in her life, Clara felt a sense of awe and freedom. The land was untamed, alive, and utterly different from the fenced pastures she had always known. Tall Bear guided her to a hidden valley where the Apache had built their village. It was a place of remarkable harmony with the land, tents and lodges nestled under cliffs, water from a hidden spring trickling nearby, the smoke of cooking fires curling into the sky. Clara's eyes widened at the beauty and the quiet order of a life so different from her own. As the day faded into evening, Tall Bear prepared her a simple meal and offered her water. He did not speak much, but his eyes held a question, a silent inquiry into whether she could trust him. Clara, still shaken from her ordeal, realized that she had no choice but to rely on him. And yet there was a stirring inside her, a strange recognition that she was exactly where she was meant to be, at least for now. As darkness fell over the canyon, Clara sat beside the fire, watching Tall Bear move with quiet confidence. His presence was commanding but not oppressive, protective but not demanding. A thought crossed her mind, daring and frightening. Perhaps the life she had been promised, the marriage, the family obligations, was not the life meant for her. Perhaps the wilderness and the man who moved through it like a shadow held the key to her freedom. Tall Bear glanced at her briefly, and in the flickering firelight he whispered almost to himself, "No one will take what belongs to me." The words were heavy with meaning, and Clara felt a strange warmth bloom in her chest. She did not yet understand what they meant, but she felt the weight of them, and the promise they carried. A promise that she might belong to someone not by duty, but by choice. The morning light filtered through the canopy of desert brush, casting dappled shadows across the Apache village. Clara awoke on a simple mat, her body still sore from the previous day's ordeal. Yet despite the aches and bruises, she felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. Here in this hidden canyon, the world of obligations and expectations from which she had fled seemed distant, almost unreal. Tall Bear was already awake, moving among the small fires where the tribe prepared the morning meal. He noticed her stirring and offered a small nod, a silent greeting that carried reassurance. Clara realized that despite the language barrier, they had begun to communicate in ways beyond words, glances, gestures, and the unspoken understanding of need and care. Over the next few days, Clara learned to navigate this new world. She followed the tribe's routines, observing how they lived in harmony with the land. They hunted with respect, tended the crops with patience, and moved with a quiet grace that reflected generations of knowledge. Tall Bear, patient and deliberate, taught her how to track small animals, find water in the desert, and identify the subtle signs of weather changes. Each lesson brought a mix of exhilaration and humility. Clara was learning not only survival, but the rhythm of life itself, a rhythm far removed from the rigid schedules of her family's ranch. It was during these lessons that Clara first noticed the quiet pull of attraction, something she had never dared to acknowledge before. Tallbear's strength was evident in every motion, yet it was tempered by gentleness. A hand extended when she stumbled, a guiding presence when fear crept in. She found herself studying him when he thought she wasn't looking. The set of his jaw, the careful way he moved through the land, the deep knowing eyes that seemed to see everything, including her own hidden fears. One evening, as the sun painted the canyon walls in shades of amber and crimson, Tallbear taught her to shoot a bow. She fumbled at first, frustrated by her inability to match his precision. He stood close behind her, his hands guiding hers as she aimed, their bodies almost touching. Clara's heart pounded, a mixture of excitement and a dizzying new awareness of desire. She could feel the heat of his body, the steady strength beneath his guidance, and a part of her longed to linger in that closeness forever. Yet even as attraction sparked between them, guilt gnawed at her. She thought of James, the fiancé she was promised to, and the duty that still clung to her like a shroud. How could she entertain these feelings for a man from another world, someone forbidden by her family, by society, by everything she had been taught to obey? The conflict twisted within her, sharp and relentless. Tallbear noticed her hesitation, his gaze softening but steady. He said little, yet his presence conveyed a silent patience and understanding that both comforted and confused her. Clara began to sense that he was aware of her internal struggle, yet he did not press her. He simply existed beside her, a living promise of something different, something she could not yet name but could no longer ignore. One night, she sat apart from the fire, watching the stars bloom across the sky. The vastness of the desert mirrored the uncharted territory of her own heart. She thought of her life back at the ranch, of the secure but joyless existence that awaited her, and then she thought of Tallbear, and the way he had saved her, guided her, and protected her in ways no one else ever had. A thrill of fear and longing mingled in her chest. She knew her feelings were forbidden, yet undeniable. Tallbear approached quietly, his shadow falling across her as he knelt beside her. His hand hovered near hers, a tentative gesture of connection. She did not move away. The silence stretched between them, filled with a tension neither dared to break with words. Finally, in a whisper, he spoke. Though she only understood fragments of the language, the tone carried its full weight. The message was clear. He was claiming her, not by force but by devotion and protection. That night, as Clara lay under the vast starlit sky, she understood the truth she had been avoiding. She was no longer just a daughter bound by duty. Here with Tallbear in this untamed land, she felt the stirrings of freedom, passion, and love. And though the path ahead was uncertain and fraught with danger, she could not deny the pull of her heart toward the Apache warrior who had become her protector, her teacher, and perhaps one day, her destiny. The morning sun rose over the canyon, casting golden light on the rugged cliffs and the hidden village nestled among them. Clara had begun to feel almost at home, her heart settling into a rhythm she had never known in the confines of her father's ranch. The air smelled of sage and smoke, and the laughter of children running barefoot over the rocky terrain carried a freedom that made her chest ache with longing. Yet beneath this calm, a tension lingered, one she could not yet name. That tension made itself known the day a rider appeared on the distant ridge, a lone figure moving swiftly across the high plains. Clara saw him first, a glint of sunlight catching the steel of a rifle. Fear prickled along her spine, and she realized instantly who he was, one of James Hawthorne's men. Her father's plans were not idle threats. Her engagement was more than a promise, it was a binding arrangement, enforced by those willing to do whatever it took to see it carried out. Tallbear approached quietly, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the approaching figure. His hand brushed against Clara's shoulder, grounding her. "They come," he said, his voice low, carrying the weight of inevitability. Clara felt a wave of dread. She had fled her father's control only to have it chase her here, to this hidden sanctuary. The rider came closer, shouting her name, demanding her return. The sound of his voice, so familiar yet foreign in this place, made Clara's stomach churn. She wanted to run, to hide even further in the canyon's twists and shadows, but she could not deny the pull of loyalty, of fear, of the past she had tried to leave behind. Tallbear acted swiftly. With a silent signal, The tribe moved to protect her, using the terrain to their advantage. Hidden trails, narrow ledges, and natural barriers became instruments of defense. The Apache warriors, silent and deadly, positioned themselves so that the intruder would be delayed, disoriented, and ultimately forced to retreat. Clara watched in awe, both terrified and exhilarated, as the land itself seemed to bend to their will, turning the canyon into a fortress. During the tense standoff, Tall Bear stayed close to her side, his presence a shield she could feel as much as see. The closeness, the quiet strength, and the fierce determination he radiated deepened the feelings she had struggled to suppress. Fear and desire mingled in her chest, making her pulse quicken. She realized, with a mix of shame and longing, that she had begun to care for this man, not just as a savior, but as something far more complicated, far more dangerous. As the sun climbed higher, the intruder's frustration grew. Clara's heart pounded as she listened to the shouts and the clang of horses' hooves on stone. Her thoughts raced. What would happen if they captured her? Would she be dragged back to a life of comfort and constraint, leaving behind the freedom, the wildness, and the connection she had found here? Tall Bear, sensing her inner turmoil, took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. Though his words were few, the meaning was unmistakable. She was under his protection, and he would not let anyone take her from this place, from him. His gaze held hers, steady and unyielding, and in that moment, Clara felt both terrified and inexplicably safe. As the afternoon wore on, the lone rider finally retreated, beaten not by force but by the cunning and unity of the Apache warriors. Clara's relief was immediate, but it was mixed with a newfound awareness of the danger that now loomed permanently over her. Her past would not easily release its hold, and the promise made to another remained a shadow that threatened her newfound freedom. That night, sitting by the fire, Clara realized the magnitude of the choice before her. Her life could remain bound by duty, obedience, and the expectations of others, or she could embrace the wild, uncertain path that led her deeper into the Apache world and closer to Tall Bear. She felt the thrill of danger, the weight of desire, and the exhilaration of freedom, all at once. Tall Bear's presence beside her was both grounding and electrifying. His hand brushed hers again, and she felt the silent promise in his earlier words resurface. "No one will take what belongs to me." Clara's heart caught in her chest. The meaning was no longer ambiguous. It was a vow, a declaration, and a challenge. The threat of her past was real, but so was the undeniable pull of the man who had saved her life and claimed her heart. The canyon night stretched endlessly above them, stars glimmering like watchful eyes, and Clara understood that she had crossed a threshold. She was no longer merely a girl promised to another. She was a woman on the edge of a life she had chosen, or would fight to claim, and her heart had already begun to lean toward the Apache warrior who stood silently by her side. The desert sun beat mercilessly overhead as Clara and Tall Bear rode along the narrow canyon trails. Dust swirled around their horses' hooves, and the dry wind carried the harsh scent of sagebrush and sun-baked earth. Clara's muscles ached from hours of riding, yet adrenaline pushed her forward, sharp and insistent. She could hear the distant thunder of hooves behind them. James Hawthorne's men were relentless, tracking her across the plains with single-minded determination. Tall Bear moved with fluid precision, guiding their horses along trails invisible to the untrained eye. Every turn, every ridge was chosen to give them an advantage, to keep them one step ahead of those who sought to drag her back into the life she had fled. Clara marveled at his knowledge of the land. Every rock, every canyon wall, every hidden passage seemed to belong to him, as if the desert itself obeyed his command. "Hold close," Tall Bear instructed, his voice low, carrying authority without harshness. Clara leaned against him as their horses navigated a treacherous ridge. The wind whipped her hair across her face, stinging her eyes, but she ignored the discomfort. Her heart pounded not only from fear, but from the closeness of the man who had become her protector, her guide, and increasingly the center of her thoughts. Behind them, the pursuers' shouts and the pounding of hooves grew louder. Clara's fear spiked. She imagined herself captured and forced back into her father's plans. The life of constraint she had fled pressing down upon her like a heavy shroud. She glanced at Tall Bear, who met her gaze with calm determination. His eyes conveyed a silent promise she would not be taken. The reassurance strengthened her resolve, grounding her in the present, in the life she was choosing rather than the life she was running from. They ducked into a narrow canyon, horses scrambling over jagged stones, and for a moment, Clara felt a surge of exhilaration that drowned her fear. She realized how alive she felt, every nerve alert, every sense heightened. The desert was no longer just a vast, empty expanse. It was a labyrinth that she and Tall Bear could navigate together, a place where survival demanded courage and instinct. Tall Bear signaled a sudden turn, and they vanished into a hidden pass, the pursuer's path momentarily blocked by the canyon's natural defenses. Clara's chest heaved with relief, and she allowed herself a brief glance at her companion. He rode with a quiet intensity, muscles taut, eyes scanning every shadow, every ridge. She had never seen anyone move through danger with such confidence, such mastery. A strange thrill surged within her, fear mingling with admiration, with something deeper she barely dared name. Hours passed like this, the chase stretching endlessly through the desert. Clara grew aware of how dependent she had become on Tall Bear, not just for safety but for guidance, for the small reassurance of his presence beside her. Each time their hands brushed, each time he leaned close to whisper directions over the wind, her pulse quickened, and she felt the stirrings of something forbidden but irresistible. By late afternoon, the pursuers' shouts had faded. They had been forced to turn back, deterred by the cunning trails and obstacles of the canyon. Clara sank onto her horse's back, exhausted but exhilarated, and finally allowed herself to breathe. The tension of pursuit had left her body trembling, her heart still racing, but a profound sense of relief filled her chest. Tall Bear dismounted, his eyes scanning the horizon one last time. He approached her, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. The gesture was simple, almost casual, yet it carried a weight that made her stomach twist. "Safe. For now?" he murmured. And though his words were few, their meaning was unmistakable. Clara's mind whirled. She had survived the chase, and for the first time, she realized that her freedom and the life she might build depended not on luck, but on her courage and the strength of the bond forming between her and this Apache warrior. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a wild and untamed expanse filled with danger, possibility, and the growing, unspoken desire between them. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the canyon in golden amber, Clara felt a surge of determination. She would not return to a life dictated by promises made to another. She would face the dangers ahead, side by side with Tall Bear, and she would follow her own heart, no matter how forbidden, no matter how uncertain. The chase had ended, but Clara knew this was only the beginning. Night had fallen over the canyon, draping the hidden village in a quiet, starlit hush. The fires of the Apache lodges flickered softly, casting shadows that danced across the rocky walls. Clara sat slightly apart from the others, the warmth of the fire failing to reach the chill that had settled in her chest. She thought of her life before this, of the ranch, of James Hawthorne, of the promise she had made. It all felt like a distant, suffocating dream compared to the freedom and danger of the canyon. Tall Bear approached silently, as he often did, and sat beside her. He did not speak at first, only offered her a hand, which she took instinctively. The contact was simple, yet it sent a shiver of awareness through her. She realized that her heart had begun to recognize a different rhythm, one that beat in tandem with his presence. "You are afraid," he said finally, his words gentle, almost a statement rather than a question. She nodded, unable to deny it. "Of being taken back?" he asked, and she felt the weight of truth in his gaze. "Of losing yourself?" The words were soft, almost whispered, and yet they cut through the layers of her fear, naming exactly what she felt, but could not articulate. Clara swallowed hard, struggling to meet his eyes. I do not know what I want," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I know what they want for me. I know what my family expects. But here, with you, everything is different. I don't know where I belong." Tall Bear's eyes softened, and he reached for her hand again, this time letting their fingers intertwine. The gesture was deliberate, comforting, and intimate all at once. "You belong where you choose to be," he said. "Not to them, not to anyone, but to yourself. And if you will let me, I will protect what is yours." Her chest tightened. The words carried a weight she had never expected. Protection, yes, but not ownership. Yet the glance he gave her, the subtle assertion of claim tempered by respect, ignited something inside her that she could not suppress. Fear, desire, longing, they all mixed together. A tangle of emotions she had no experience naming. That night, beneath the vast desert sky, Clara confessed her deepest fear, that she would be torn from this life, from the place that had shown her freedom, and from the man who had become her protector. Her guide and the first person to truly see her. Her words were halting, raw, but in the stillness of the canyon they held power. Tall Bear listened quietly, not interrupting, not judging. When she fell silent, he leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Your heart knows its truth," he said softly. "Do not let the expectations of others bind it. I will not ask you to choose me lightly, only to see the truth of what is in your heart." Clara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had been taught obedience all her life, yet here, in the desert night, she learned a different kind of courage, the courage to acknowledge her own desires, even when they defied duty, family, and social expectation. She realized that love, like freedom, could not be commanded or coerced. It had to be recognized. Nurtured and protected, they sat together in silence, the fire crackling between them, the stars blazing above. The Apache village slept around them, oblivious to the quiet revolution taking place in the heart of a young woman who had escaped the life imposed upon her. In that silence, Clara understood something profound. The connection she shared with Tall Bear was no fleeting fascination or convenience. It was real, it was dangerous, and it was hers to acknowledge. And as she leaned slightly closer, feeling the warmth of his body beside her, she finally allowed herself to hope that perhaps, just perhaps, her heart would not belong to another, but to the man who had shown her the meaning of protection, freedom, and desire. The canyon lay in an uneasy quiet, the morning sun gilding the cliffs with a harsh golden light. Clara awoke with a sense of foreboding. Something in the air was taut, as if the desert itself held its breath. Tall Bear had sensed it too. The Apache warrior's movements were deliberate, his eyes scanning the distant ridges with intensity, every muscle coiled for action. By midday, the threat revealed itself. A group of riders appeared on the horizon, kicking up clouds of dust that shimmered in the heat. Clara recognized them immediately. James Hawthorne and his men, armed and determined, had tracked her to the canyon. Panic clenched at her heart, but she forced herself to stay calm, drawing strength from Tall Bear's quiet presence. "They come," he said simply, his voice low but unwavering. He gestured for Clara to follow him along a hidden path, one he knew well, one designed to give them the advantage. As they moved, the terrain shifted dramatically. Steep ridges, jagged rocks, and narrow passes that seemed impossible for anyone unfamiliar with the canyon. Each step, each careful placement of horse hooves, reminded Clara of the vast difference between the untamed land and the world she had left behind. The riders closed in, their shouts echoing across the canyon walls. James Hawthorne demanded her return, his voice strident and unyielding, carrying the weight of entitlement Clara had known all her life. Fear surged, but it was tempered by a growing defiance, a realization that she was no longer the powerless girl promised to another. Tall Bear signaled to his warriors, and the air changed instantly. The hidden paths became a maze for the pursuers. Rocks, loose earth, and the canyon's natural twists slowed them, throwing them into confusion. Clara watched, heart pounding, as the men's discipline faltered in the face of the warriors' strategic cunning. Every movement of Tall Bear was precise. Every instruction he gave was silent yet effective, guiding the tribe to protect her without unnecessary bloodshed. When the riders finally spotted her, she stepped forward, standing tall atop a ridge. Her dress, though simple, flowed in the wind, and she raised her chin in defiance. "I will not go with you," she shouted, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her. The words shocked both the pursuers and the Apache warriors watching beside her. She realized, with a fierce sense of clarity, that she was claiming her own voice for the first time. James Hawthorne's face darkened in anger. "You belong to your family and to me," he spat, riding closer. Clara's stomach twisted, but she did not back down. Tall Bear moved to her side, the unspoken warning in his stance clear. Anyone who came closer would face the consequences. The tension was palpable, every second stretching into an eternity. Then, without a word, Tall Bear's hand brushed against hers, a subtle gesture of reassurance. The contact sent a shock through her, a silent promise that she was safe, that she was not alone, and that the canyon itself, and the warrior who knew it intimately, would protect her. The standoff lasted hours, but by late afternoon, the pursuers' frustration had grown too great. The canyon, seemingly alive under Tall Bear's guidance, had worn them down. They retreated, muttering threats, leaving Clara trembling but unscathed. Relief washed over her, yet it was mingled with a realization. Her past, her family, her promises. All of it was still a force that could follow her if she was not vigilant. That evening, Clara sat beside the fire, her hand still tingling from the brief contact with Tall Bear. The events of the day had revealed something essential. The man beside her was more than a protector. He was a partner, a guide through the wild, and perhaps the only person who could ever understand her heart. The canyon around them, silent under the starlit sky, seemed to echo the quiet revolution that had begun in Clara's life. The choice to embrace her own desires, to claim her freedom, and to follow the man who had shown her both courage and love. As the fire crackled, Tall Bear's eyes met hers, the weight of his earlier promise lingering in the silence. No one will take what belongs to me. Clara's heart swelled, and for the first time, she truly believed that she had the right to belong to herself and to the man who had captured her heart. The canyon was bathed in the soft, golden glow of late afternoon, the shadows stretching long across the rocky terrain. Clara sat on a sun-warmed boulder, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had spent the morning watching the Apache warriors go about their work, mending tools, tending horses, and maintaining the hidden village. But her mind had been elsewhere, focused entirely on the choice that now demanded her courage. The memory of the confrontation with James Hawthorne's men was still vivid. The pounding hooves, the shouts echoing across the canyon walls, and the sharp, undeniable truth that she had been running not just from a promise, but from a life that was never hers to claim. Her chest tightened at the thought of returning, of giving in to the expectations of her family and the rigid confines of duty. She could not do it. Tall Bear approached, his movements quiet and deliberate, as if the canyon itself was guiding his steps. He stopped a short distance away, waiting, letting her gather her resolve. Clara met his gaze, and in that moment she saw not only the strength and protection he offered, but the profound respect and understanding that had grown between them. She felt a flutter of nervous anticipation, a mixture of fear and desire, knowing that the decision she was about to make would change her life forever. "I cannot go back," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "I cannot be the woman they want me to be, not if it means giving up myself." She felt the weight of her own words, the finality and the freedom they carried. Tall Bear's expression softened, a subtle smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Then you choose your own path," he said, his voice low but steady. "No one can take you from it. Not them, not the world." The simplicity of his words struck Clara with an almost overwhelming clarity. She had spent her life bound by the desires and plans of others, but here, in the hidden heart of the canyon, she finally understood what it meant to claim her own life. And with that claim came not just freedom, but the recognition that she could belong somewhere, not to her family's ambitions, not to a man she barely knew, but to a life she could shape with her own hands and heart. She stepped closer to Tall Bear, the warmth of his presence enveloping her, a protective shield against the uncertainties of the world. "Then I choose you," she whispered, the words both an acknowledgement of the bond that had grown between them and a declaration of her own agency. "If I am to belong anywhere, it will be here, with you." Tall Bear reached for her hand, this time intertwining his fingers with hers in a gesture that was tender, yet imbued with unshakable strength. The promise in his earlier words resurfaced, clear and unwavering. "No one will take what belongs to me." Now, she understood fully that the claim he made was not one of possession in the cruel sense, but of protection, loyalty, and recognition. It was a vow that they would face the world together, and that her heart, her choices, and her freedom were safe in his care. The rest of the day passed in a quiet haze of relief and tentative joy. Clara allowed herself to imagine a life where she could walk beside Tall Bear through the desert, learning, surviving, and loving in a way that had never been possible in the rigid confines of her old world. She felt the exhilarating mix of danger and liberation, the thrill of knowing that the path ahead was uncertain, but entirely hers to tread. As evening fell, the village settled into calm under the first stars. The firelight flickered across the canyon walls, illuminating the soft curve of Clara's face and the quiet determination in Tallbear's eyes. Together they sat in silence, hands clasped, hearts aligned. The choice had been made. A bridge between two worlds formed not by obligation but by courage, love and the undeniable claim of destiny. For Clara, the weight of promises and expectations that had once held her captive had dissolved like morning mist under the sun. She was free. She had chosen herself, her heart, and the man who had shown her that love and loyalty could be fierce, unyielding, and entirely her own. The canyon dawned in a soft golden light, the wind carrying the scent of sage and sun-baked earth. Clara woke to the quiet murmur of the village, the children already playing among the rocks, their laughter echoing like music against the cliffs. For the first time she felt the weight of her past obligations lift entirely from her shoulders. She was no longer promised to another, no longer bound by expectations she had never chosen. The freedom she had longed for was hers, and with it came a new and exhilarating responsibility, the life she would build with Tallbear. Their mornings had begun to take on a rhythm, learning, surviving, sharing. Clara followed the tribe through the canyon, tending to small tasks alongside them, gaining not only skills but a deep respect for their harmony with the land. And Tallbear was always near, his presence both comforting and invigorating. She found herself observing him often, captivated by the quiet strength in every movement, the careful attention he gave to both the people and the land around him. His eyes, deep and steady, seemed to see her fully, acknowledging not just her vulnerability but her courage, her spirit, and her heart. It was during these quiet moments, between tasks and lessons, that Clara began to understand the depth of her feelings. The attraction she had once struggled to name had grown into something undeniable, a connection forged through danger, trust, and shared experience. Each glance, each subtle touch carried weight. Even the smallest gestures, a hand resting briefly on hers, a look held a moment too long, spoke volumes of unspoken devotion. One evening, as the canyon glowed in the last amber of sunlight, Tallbear led her to a secluded ledge overlooking the valley. Below, the village moved through the evening routines, the fires flickering like tiny stars. He spoke softly. In his language she understood only in fragments, yet the emotion in his voice transcended words. Clara felt it fully, pride, loyalty, and love. "I will not let anyone harm you," he said, his tone resolute. "You are mine in the truest sense, not possession, but protection. My loyalty is to you." Clara's chest tightened at the declaration. She understood then that this bond was unlike any she had known. It was built on respect, trust, and unwavering commitment. She felt a warmth bloom in her chest, a sense of belonging she had never known. In response, she leaned closer, letting her hand brush his, feeling the steady pulse of life and strength beneath his fingers. "And I will not let myself be taken back," she whispered, her voice carrying the conviction of her choice. "I am here with you because I choose it every day." The connection between them deepened as days passed. Their love was not merely passion, but a steady, grounding force. They hunted together, learned together, and shared the quiet moments that defined their lives in the canyon. Every shared task became a testament to their loyalty. Every challenge overcome reinforced the bond that neither distance, danger, nor past obligations could sever. Clara found herself thinking of the future differently. She no longer feared what lay beyond the canyon walls, for she had learned the true meaning of partnership. Love, she realized, was not the surrender to another's will, but the shared effort to protect, support, and honor one another. With Tallbear, she felt the fullness of this truth. By nightfall, they sat side by side beneath the stars, hands entwined, hearts beating in unison. The vast desert stretched before them, endless and untamed, reflecting the wild and unbound nature of the love they had forged. The promise of the Apache warrior, "No one will take what belongs to me," resonated not as a threat but as a vow of unwavering fidelity. Clara's heart swelled with trust, gratitude, and desire. For the first time in her life, she felt entirely whole. She had escaped the chains of obligation, embraced the freedom of the canyon, and discovered a love rooted in courage, loyalty, and mutual respect. Together, Clara and Tallbear were not merely surviving, they were thriving, building a bond that would endure the tests of the desert, of danger, and of the world beyond. The first light of dawn spilled over the canyon, painting the cliffs in pale gold and silver. Clara stood at the edge of the high plateau, the wind tugging at her hair, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of freedom. The events of the past weeks, the chase, the confrontation, the confessions, had brought her here to a place of clarity and resolve. For the first time, she truly understood the power of choice, of loyalty, and of love. Tall Bear approached quietly, his footsteps soundless against the rocky ground. He stopped beside her, eyes scanning the horizon, then settling on her face with a warmth that spoke of unspoken devotion. Clara felt the familiar flutter in her chest, the mix of desire, trust, and awe that had grown between them over the days and nights they had shared. Here in the heart of the canyon, there were no promises forced by others, no duties imposed by distant families, no expectations to meet. There was only the life they would build together. "I never knew freedom could feel like this," Clara whispered, her voice carrying over the wind. "And yet I have you beside me. I am safe and I am alive in a way I never imagined." Tall Bear nodded, his hand brushing hers. "You are yours," he said softly, "and we face the world together. What belongs to me is also your choice, your heart, your life. No one can take it from you. Not your past, not those who would try." The canyon stretched endlessly before them, a wild expanse of rocks, hidden valleys, and untamed trails. Clara realized that this land mirrored her own journey, wild, unpredictable, and fiercely alive. Just as she had chosen to step into it, she had chosen the man who had guided her, protected her, and loved her without conditions. Tall Bear was more than a protector. He was her partner, her equal, and the man who had awakened in her a courage she did not know she possessed. They spent the day moving through the hidden paths of the canyon, scouting trails and learning new ways to live with the land rather than fight it. Every shared task, every small victory, became a celebration of their partnership. Clara laughed as Tall Bear guided her hand in sharpening a blade, her fingers brushing his, the simple touch filled with electricity and trust. She felt whole in ways she had never known, her life no longer dictated by obligation but shaped by her own choices and the bond she shared with him. As evening fell, they returned to the village. The Apache community welcomed them with quiet respect, the children running to greet Clara with laughter, the warriors acknowledging her as one of their own. The sense of belonging she felt was overwhelming. She was not merely a guest in this hidden world, she was part of it, and it had become part of her. Sitting together by the fire that night, the sky ablaze with stars, Clara allowed herself to imagine the future. Children laughing among the rocks, the canyon echoing with life and freedom. Mornings spent exploring trails, evenings spent under endless skies, and years lived with courage, loyalty, and love as their foundation. Tall Bear's hand found hers, fingers intertwining, and she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. Finally, in the quiet of the starlit canyon, Tall Bear's voice broke the comfortable silence. "No one will take what belongs to me, and now, what belongs to me is also yours to keep, freely." Clara leaned into him, her heart swelling with gratitude, relief, and joy. She had escaped the life imposed upon her, survived danger, and discovered a love built on choice, trust, and devotion. The canyon, vast and wild, had become a sanctuary, a place where love and freedom intertwined. And together, she and Tall Bear would forge a life defined not by promises forced upon them, but by the unwavering bond they had chosen to honor. As the fire crackled and the stars shimmered above, Clara felt the weight of the past lift entirely. She was free, she was loved, and she was home. The new beginning she had longed for was finally here, and she would walk into it with courage, heart open, and hand in hand with the man who had claimed her heart and whose heart she had freely chosen in return.